Elvis. He was the king. Two men knew him better than almost anyone. David Stanley, the stepbrother, who at age 4 was moved from a children's home to Graceland.
I remember how it felt because after being in that boarding home for so long, it was the first time I really felt like I
had a lot of love to catch up on.
And Lamar Fike, the man who knew Elvis from Sun Records to Sunset.
His nightmares were horrendous. I mean, you know, his mother and father, they both had nightmares.
What was Elvis like? The inner circle knew. Now, for the first time on video, these men talk about living with Elvis.
Lamar, how old were you when you first met Elvis?
21, 22, I think, somewhere around there. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was then.
What year was that?
I want to say 1955.
So it was there in Memphis?
Yeah, it was over at the Sun Studio, which was over on Union and Marshall. Mm-hmm. Carl Perkins and Johnny Cash.
It was like the Sun.
They all got around that picture where they were all around the piano.
Right.
And I had come over there because I was friends with Sam. And
did Sam introduce you to him?
Yeah, he did. He really did. Then after I stood around the studio and watched him do that.
What was he like then?
Kind of loose. He was like, from what I could tell, my first impressions, he was just very, very loose. It was a case of, I think the whole time, now that I look back, you know, in retrospect, I think he took it day to day then. I mean, everything was starting, and it really, you know, I don't think he expected to last long.
Did he have a better than thou or ego?
No.
Not at all?
His main thing was really trying to be one of the guys.
Did Elvis just kind of welcome you right in? Once you had met him and been around him, it was just kind of like...
he started, he thought I was very funny, and it was a case where, you know...
Well, he's right about that.
Yeah, what can I tell you? It was a case really where he enjoyed that part of it, and when I got ready to leave that afternoon, he said, "Hey man, stay in touch," you know, and I said, "Well, I will," you know, and he said, "Anytime you want to buzz back out, come back out here at the house," he said, you know, I enjoy you, we have a lot of fun. And I said, "Okay." And
my favorite movie was Jailhouse Rock. You know, Elvis choreographed that whole thing, dancing, moving so well. That's when you that was your first picture you was involved in. Tell me a little bit about that in Hollywood.
They had been shooting like 2 or 3 days when I got there, maybe 3. We went over to the set the first day I went over to the set. I decided that I was going to try to stay controlled and act nonchalant. And we had a place where we stayed. It was called the Permanent Dressing Room. It was a building on the lot, and it had 3 or 4 floors. I'm not sure. I think 3 floors. And to give you an example of who was in the Permanent Dressing Room, that's where the stars first came and put all their makeup on and so forth. They didn't go over to the makeup department. And on the first floor was Yul Brynner. When you came around the corner, he was doing a picture called The Brothers Karamazov. Across the hall on the first floor, Clark Gable had his place. On our floor was Glenn Ford, Danny Kaye, John Cassavetes, Robert Taylor. These were all stars.
These are aliens to me, okay?
Well, okay, that's what I'm saying. These were, Clark Gable's not.
No,
could be, okay. And Yul Brynner couldn't be. But these were stars that we grew up with. And it was so exciting. And in fact, a real quick story that was very funny. We had been there that morning, and he'd already had his makeup done. And I was already just rattled. I saw Yul Brynner when I came in. That bothered me, and I tried to keep my composure. And we're standing in the dressing room, and there came a knock on the door. And I opened the door up, and Glenn Ford was standing there, and he had a Navy uniform on because I'd forgotten what picture he was doing. And I stood there and looked at him for a minute, and I slammed the door in his face, and I turned around, and Elvis was sitting in the chair. And he said, "What's that?" And I said, "I want you to listen to me real close because I can't say it again." He said, "What?" I said, "Glenn Ford is behind this door." And he said, "Well, let him in." I said, "No, wait a minute now, listen. I don't know what he wants. I don't know what to do here." He said, "Well, what are you going to do?" He said, "Lamar, let him in." You know, and I opened the door up, and Glenn Ford said, "Well, am I not welcome or what?" You know, and I said, "Look, you just startled me," you know, and he came in, he wanted an autograph from Elvis. And after he left, Elvis said, "Look, I want to talk to you." And I said, "What about?" He said, "Look, I am just as nervous as you are meeting these people." He said, "Because, you know, I grew up the same way you did. We go to the Westerns and see all the people." And he said, "You got to settle down." He said, "You got to help me in this situation." And I said, "Well, I'll try. You know, I said, but it's not going to be easy.
Right.
And I mean, it wasn't 10 minutes later, Robert Taylor, we walked out the dressing room door to get in the car. Robert Taylor walked up. I got in the car. I said, look, I got to have something. I said, I am just a wreck. And we got over on the set. It even got worse because
Was he ever
the other
intimidated? Really intimidated?
You know, he was never intimidated.
Visually?
He was okay, but he was like, he played it down.
Yeah.
They all wanted to meet him because right then he was such a phenomenon.
Sure.
You know, that they wanted to meet him, and
They
were
respect
just
him?
Yeah, they were in awe of
As
him.
an artist?
Yeah, and he had to adjust to this, and he had already done 2 pictures by the time he had done Jailhouse Rock.
Mm-hmm.
He did Love Me Tender, Loving You, and then he stepped into Jailhouse Rock, so he was a little more used to it than I was.
You know, on Jailhouse Rock, you know, that scene when they're in the jails dancing. Now, is it a rumor or is it true? Did Elvis choreograph that dance at Jailhouse Rock?
There was a choreographer, okay?
Uh-huh.
And the choreographer and himself worked together. When they worked this thing out, the choreographer could not get over the fact how he moved.
Mm-hmm.
And it was Elvis's idea to grab hold of that pole
Yeah.
and make the moves and then slide down it. But he literally, him and this choreographer put the whole thing together.
That was the greatest piece I ever saw.
Unbelievable.
Just
really fantastic.
That was the closest I've seen him at his full potential.
When I first came to Graceland, he had, and I had been told this even when I was in Hollywood with him, before we came out there, that he had nightmares and would get up and walk around and just really jump out of bed and try to hit people and everything else, or whoever's in the room with him. And so when I got back, he said, look, he said, why don't you just come on up here and sleep everything? Because the bed had to be 20 feet wide. I said, big king-size bed. And I said, well, all right, you know. And I had been up there, first night I went up there with him, and I carried some girls home, and I got back, and he was already asleep, so I went up there and got in bed. About an hour and a half, I'd been asleep an hour or so, the cover got ripped off of me, and I looked over, and he was standing in the middle of the bed with the cover over his head. It was going round. I mean, we're talking an enormous thing here, you know. I'll get you, and I'm going, what do I do? You know, I'm going, I don't know what to do. And I moved like this, and he hit me in the jaw, and I moved out of the way to keep from getting hit again. I hit the light, and he stood there when the light came on and just broke up laughing. And I said, what was all of that? He said, well, always, you know, he said something like that. He said, get my attention. I said, I'm not going to touch you in 1,000 years. And so we went down to breakfast the next morning, and Gladys was sitting there. I said, Miss Preston, I said, what is that? What is he? She said, what are you talking about? I said, he jumped up and did all this last night. She said, I forgot to tell you he has nightmares, and always turn a light on, you'll be okay. I said, well, I inadvertently did it. She said, well, you saved yourself an awful lot of trouble. From then on out, I made a pallet down at the end of the bed and slept on the pallet. I would not even sleep on the bed. I said, I don't want to. I said, look, you jump up, and I would dive. Or, you know, I know it, and I'd holler at him, he'd wake up. But his nightmares were horrendous. I mean, you know, his mother and father, they both had nightmares, and they would get up and walk. I heard one time where they got up and took a mattress off the bed, I think, because and were taking it out on the roof because they thought somebody with the house was burning down. But they were all doing it together.
They're dreamers, man.
David, do you remember the first time you met Elvis?
Yeah, 1960. You know, Elvis had just come back from Germany,
Right.
and he was at Graceland. And in the meantime, my 2 older brothers and myself were in a boarding home in Virginia. As my brother Billy puts it, a place for rich kids. But
That was starting.
yeah, that was starting. But it was a real old, dark, dirty, dingy place. I'll never forget it. I used to be in my crib, just being a baby, crying myself to sleep at night because I couldn't understand where my mom and dad was at. Boys and girls would see their families every weekend, but nobody would come and see us. And so finally in 1960, you know, they came back. And I do remember Ricky and Billy and Rick coming to my crib and saying, David, don't cry. You'll see someday things will get better.
Had to be a big crib.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I was 13.5 at birth.
Yeah,
So what does that
right.
tell you? But anyway,
Big
mom came back. It was 1960. They were in that Mach 2, that white Mach 2 Continental.
That's right.
And they came to get us. We got in a car. Obviously, us 3 boys were looking for Dad, but instead there was someone else. We took the car from Virginia to Memphis. And when we began to drive up the driveway, my little 4-year-old face looked out the window at the mansion that I'd be spending the next 17 years in. And it was at that time my brother Rick nudged me and said, "David, I told you someday things were going to get better."
What a prophecy. Well, yeah.
What a revelation. So
Yeah.
we drove up the driveway, we got in a car, and we walked in the front door, and there stood a man 25 years old, you know, the king of rock and roll, and obviously Elvis. And we didn't understand what was going on. You know, when I was 4 years old, I didn't know what a hound dog was. I didn't know what an Elvis Presley was. And Mom, you know, the way Mom is, she gets excited about every single thing. She walks in, "This is Elvis, this is Elvis," and I'm just kind of walking around, you know, checking the place out.
I remember
what Rick said. "Nice place, I can live here." But I remember Elvis walking over to us three boys, and he picked us up individually and gave us a hug and welcomed us into his family. And you know, Elvis knew we were confused. Elvis knew that here's three guys who came from a broken home, and here's a guy that didn't have to accept us.
He was concerned about that a lot, really.
And he was really concerned with what was going to happen to us. And I remember when he picked me up, and he gave me that first hug, he embraced me, he held me real tight. I remember how it felt, because after being in that boarding home for so long, it was the first time I really felt like I
You had a lot of love to
experienced,
catch up on.
Yeah, a lot to catch up on. And,
Yeah.
and obviously that was the beginning of a very unusual lifestyle. But I remember that. It was 1960. Elvis loved us right into his family. Right after that, shot down to Florida, I believe, and started the Frank Sinatra show.
Well, what happened before that, though, we went that night that y'all came.
Oh, yeah. Well, the next day we went to sleep.
Yeah.
You know,
y'all well, that evening, y'all went ahead and went to bed and put you up and everything. And we ripped down to, it was like a Kmart's or a Walmart. It was a Kmart type thing or whatever. And they opened it up for us at night. And about 5 or 6 of us went down there. And Elvis said, "I want toys to match for."
We walked
he
out
said, Lamar, if you pick out one toy and I pick out one toy, I want that toy to match for all three of them. He said, "These are brothers, and we don't want them to be jealous of each other."
As we walked out in the backyard the next day,
Well,
after a long day,
we had to put them together all that night.
we walked out the next day, 3 bikes, 3 trikes, 3
That's
cats,
right.
3 dogs, 3 toy cars, 3
I had
toy of
2
everything.
cigar boxes full of
Honestly thought
screws.
Elvis was Santa Claus.
He had bought me a 74, what we call a Harley 74. And we would ride down that hill before you get to Graceland. And we would go wide open, or as fast as we could get them up to, and see who would chicken out first or who could whip in to the driveway, you know. And nobody wanted to chicken out, you know. And it was just a slight misty rain, okay?
Oh, no.
Yeah, and Elvis whipped it, and it worked for him. And
Everything
I saw,
worked for him.
it worked for him, and I said, well, I'll just lay mine down and catch a dry spot and, shoot him beside him. Well, I laid it down, and he just kept right on going. I had no control whatsoever, and I look up, and there's a Memphis City bus in front of me, and I just, thoughts go through your mind. I said, well, I can't get, I was trying to get around it, and I went under it.
Son of a your eyes look like pizza plates,
Oh,
man.
listen, I was so scared, and I went clean under it, and when I went under it, it lifted the back part of the bus up, and I went past the rear end of the bus almost midway before I stopped. I thought I was dead.
No wonder it didn't kill you.
Well, I thought I was dead. I couldn't, and I tried to move, and the first thought the rest of my mind, I said, my God, I'm paralyzed. I said, what am I going to do? And he rushed up to the bus, and he was down on his hands and knees looking at me, and he laughing. He said, what do you want to do? I said, I think I'm paralyzed. I cannot move. And he said, are you serious? I said, I'm up under a bus. It's on top of me. I'm stuck in a motorcycle. You're asking me if I'm serious, right? I said, you got a minute here? Get this thing off. He started laughing so hard that he couldn't. And I said, I was people around me. I said, somebody get somebody to please help me. Finally, after about 30 minutes, man, he tried to explain to somebody what was going on. He was drawing a crowd. And I said, look, I'm under here. The building will be terrible if I die there. Everybody's going to be standing out there talking to him. They got a crane truck there behind them, and it's long. They pick up these big tractor trailers with, man. It came up and hooked underneath and lifted. That thing must have lifted up 15 feet to get it. And they pulled me out from it. I had not one scratch
I bet
on
he
me.
was rolling, man.
He laughed about that for 10 years.
You know, the other thing we did is our firework wars at Graceland.
Those
you
were
remember,
unbelievable.
Do you remember the time we had like $10,000 worth of firecrackers and
Fill them up in a
Roman
truck.
candles and everything in the
go over
white Dodge truck?
We'd go over to West Memphis and get them. Because you couldn't sell them in Memphis.
They were all in a white Dodge truck under the green tarp behind the Graceland.
That's right.
And we were going to have a war, and Elvis got out there and he just got a couple of the fireballs and started shooting them back and forth.
Roman candles.
One of the fireballs went into $10,000 worth of fireworks.
That's
Son,
right.
it was like Vietnam, man. We were hugging the ground.
It was.
Rockets were shooting all over the place. The house was on fire.
And there was a haze over the backyard like a war zone. It was just like it had been a war. It was unbelievable.
The worst.
And then after that we started putting on our leathers.
Yeah, well, we'd put
to
on
keep
the
from getting
helmets
burned
and
up.
the
Elvis, to the day he died, he had burn marks on his
Fried.
arms where we fried each other from firing. We'd fire Roman candles at
Well,
each other.
remember that time he went into Grandma's room? Grandma watching TV. He walks in there. He walks in there with one of those chasers. And Grandma, here she's about 75 years old. She, Miss Soap Opera, right? She's
Yeah.
stuck glued
Yeah.
to the tube,
Yeah.
so to say. Elvis walks in and throws a pack of those things in the ground.
And then walk back out real quick. Yeah.
I mean, that thing goes off, and Grandma,
She
man,
danced better than she ever had in her life. It was unbelievable.
she
Yeah.
comes right in there, Sonny, Sonny, Sonny.
But he would laugh so hard he would lose his breath. He'd
That was
just lay down on
incredible.
the floor. These Roman candle and firecracker fights went on all the time.
Every year.
We did it it was
That's just an example of him just taking everything literally to the limit. It's like when he bought his guns.
just wanted everything done.
It's like when he got deputized, He got deputized. Everybody's deputized.
We were bristling at porcupines.
Did I ever
we
tell
had
you-
guns all over us.
Did I ever tell you how I got deputized?
No, but
No,
yeah,
I got to tell you this.
okay,
Yeah, this is me. This wasn't him. We were in Denver,
yeah.
and I had a real bad sinus problem. And back then I was a druggie.
You still got a sinus problem.
Yeah, I still do. But back then I was a druggie, no big deal. Everybody kind of knows it. That's way back. I've overcome, fortunately.
All of us were in pretty good shape.
I remember we went down to the police department one time, and I had been in the back room blowing some coke. Elvis said, "I need to swear you in as a sergeant." Remember that? I got long brown hair.
That's right.
I got a ragged out beard, and I'm coked out, and I'm going to be a sergeant of the Denver Police Department.
Right,
Elvis said,
right.
"Come on, David, you're big and bad boy. You can just do it." We go down there. I'm standing in the captain's office. I swear to abide by the law. The kid got out of the firing range, started shooting the gun like this. 18 years old, man.
Keystone
coked out.
Cops. It was really.
But everybody was a cop. Remember, I was at school. Elvis said, "David, you got the long hair. You look cool. You can be a narc." I'm going, "Yeah, sure. If you'll just, build me a grave site in the backyard." And I wouldn't do it. But his anti-drug abuse, the way Elvis was about it, he could not stand kids. Of course, we all know what happened in Elvis's later life. His crusade turned into a tragic demise in his own life. But he wanted me to be a narc. He said, "Be a narc." All the guys were getting sworn in. He
That's
went
when
to
we were
Nixon.
fooling around with those mini narcs in Denver.
Yeah, and he got sworn in and started carrying that badge everywhere. Nixon gave it to him and started wearing all the decals, Strike Force. And then the ultimate toy of toys. We've talked go-karts, we talked golf carts, we talked fast
This was the
cars,
big
we talked
kahuna of toys,
motorcycles,
yeah,
we've talked
yeah.
it all. But when we stood out there in '75 on that tarp in Memphis, Tennessee, that big old 880 Confair, the Lisa Marie. You remember when it first pulled up to the tarp there in Memphis? Elvis got out of the car and literally fell on his knees.
Oh, yeah.
He said, "This is my greatest toy." And I
Yeah.
looked at him. This was 1975. I said, "Man, you've come a long way, son."
Oh, listen. Then we got in it.
Mm-hmm.
And Elwood David was the pilot. And Ron and Carol was the flight attendant. And I can't think of the engineer's name right now.
Ron Manning.
Yeah, that was the engineer. He had a four-person crew. And it became where you just want to show everybody what it was like. And we must have put 15, 20 people. It held 29 people.
As you would say,
29 belts. But because I was always one that's enthused in the planes. And we flew around Memphis in that thing. When that thing rotated and we took off from Memphis Airport, him and I were sitting in the sitting room in front of his bedroom. And we were in shock. I said, "Are we doing this?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "You believe this? A private 4-inch
Well, that was his
jet."
big toy.
Yeah.
I remember a story about it when we were on it one time. We were on a tour, and it was late at night after a show, and Elvis wanted to fly co-pilot.
Oh,
So he got in
yes.
there, and he
Oh,
was
yes.
flying co-pilot, and, no one told Elvis what to do. And this was the first time I ever saw anybody tell Elvis what to do.
Mm-hmm.
He was on the plane. He was flying co-pilot in the 880. I guess we're at 37,000. He looked over at Elwood David, the captain, and he said, "What would happen if I did this?"
And we did that.
We dropped about 2,800 feet,
Yeah.
just like that, man. I mean, just dropped straight
That's
down.
right.
Elwood got it under control, looked over him and said, "Get your hands off of those controls and get out right now."
I mean, as quick as you can.
Man, I mean, he wasn't kidding. For the first time I saw Elvis look at a guy with respect.
We were walking down the aisle, and I said, if you got any guts, you'll fire him. He said, not right now.
I was in England last year, you know, at the 10th anniversary of Elvis's death, and the fans were always asking me, how come Elvis never came to Europe? What's the story on that, Lamar?
The way the story came about later on, after we found out later on after he died, Colonel Parker, the way we understood it, he never ever had a passport, because Colonel Parker was not Colonel Parker. His real name was Andreas Wilhelmus van Kik, which he was Dutch.
Excuse me?
Andreas Wilhelmus van Kik.
Sounds like a car.
Well, it's Dutch, and it's hard to pronounce. See, he came
He was
over
an
here.
illegal alien?
Apparently so. And I think that the way we understood it within the group was that Colonel could never get a passport. And Colonel would not let Elvis go anywhere that he couldn't go, where he wasn't in control of the situation.
Yeah.
So as a consequence, they kept holding it off. But also at the same time, Colonel and Tom Diskin then would tell Elvis that, you know, he said, you know, the security would be very, very hard over there.
I remember,
you know.
I remember in Vegas when Elvis said, I want to go to Europe, and if Colonel Parker don't want to take me, I'll get Concerts West and Tom Hewlett to rock and roll.
That became
Get
a
them to take me over
very,
there.
very touchy subject. It really...
And, he was ready to go with Hewlett, but you're trying to tell me that Elvis missed Europe because of this very simple fact that he didn't have a passport to take him. Colonel Parker couldn't take him.
Well, that's the way we understood it. A fascinating thing with him, David, was that the supernatural side. You know, Elvis was very intrigued with supernatural, you know.
It's like he had a presence. You know, when I think about the supernatural, I think of several things. You know, I don't know about you, Lamar, but every time I went to Graceland, and I'd take a friend with me, I could look at my friend and say if Elvis was there or not.
We could almost, all of us,
you could always feel it.
You could feel the presence.
You know, and ironically, the day Elvis died, when I came to work that day, I did not feel the presence.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, something I've never
I
been
can
able to really
understand
explain. But, you know, we'd be out by the pool, for example. It's probably late 60s. You know, he's still doing movies, about to start touring again, always getting sun. Priscilla and I, Elvis, some of the other people laying out there, and the clouds would come over, and Elvis just couldn't stand it. You know, when he wanted sun, he wanted sun. It's kind of like he wanted that sandbar moved.
Well, he considered it funnery.
You know, get it out
yeah,
right.
right, yeah.
And so he walked out there, and he just lifted his hand, and he moved the cloud. And so I said, well, that's okay. Wind at 30,000 feet, you know, okay, coincidental. And then we went out in front of Graceland another time, and it was real hot, a hot August day. And Elvis said, man, I need some air. I said, well, okay. You know, I just looked at him like, sure, pal. Sure enough, he moved his hands, and then the wind began to blow. And I felt like I could explain that, too, because the weather in Tennessee, if you didn't like it, it changed in 3 minutes. But when we were driving down the street one time, actually down a highway, we were driving from Las Vegas to Palm Springs. He had bought a 76 Trans Am for Mindy Miller, and it was Mindy Miller, myself, and Steve Smith, the guy that was working for him at the time, and we drove to Palm Springs. So we're driving down the highway in Palm Springs, thundering and lightning and hailing, one of those huge storms. And Elvis says, man, I'm sick of this. We couldn't even see our hands in front of our faces. And he said, I'll take care of it. So he rolls back the sunroof. The rain is coming in on us and everything. He took his hands and he went like this. And as God is my witness, the only reason I believe it is because I was there. He went like this, and it was like the whole thing split down the middle. Pouring down, raining on one side, pouring down, raining on the other side. And it looked like the yellow brick road in the middle. Sunbeams on the road all the way down the middle as we drove all the way.
If you look behind you, you'd seen Charlton Heston.
It was like a Cecil B. DeMille movie, you know?
Yeah, right.
But he did this, and this is things that I could never explain. But, you know, Elvis's interest in the realm of the spirit. Do you remember the statue that you guys gave Elvis that he had down at Meditation Gardens of Christ? I remember Elvis took me down there one time. I was about 14 years old. And he sat down with me, and he said, David, Jesus Christ, I know who he is, but who am I? Now, Lamar, you're like me. You know Elvis could never explain how come he was so powerful. He never tried and never did anything special, but, you know, he had such a charisma and magnetism.
The last year before he died, I think yourself, myself, all of us had some sort of thoughts that, or, you know, things in our mind that something was not right. And because we knew he was very ill. And I know one time we were on the last tour, I think, and we had landed somewhere. And Elvis had to go down and accept some sort of plaque. And he looked so bad. I just, you know, it was just horrible how bad. And he got up and walked down the aisle past me. And he'd always go by me, he'd wink or something like that, or, you know, put his arm on my shoulder or something. And, you know, he walked by me, and I was so concerned about how he looked because he had that jumpsuit on. You know, I stood up and I said, you know, boys, I said, I don't think he'll ever see the snow fly.
You know, he was doing that CBS special in '77.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll never forget, we were standing backstage, and Elvis didn't like the way he looked. And Rick and I and Larry Geller and several were standing around just before he went out.
Yeah.
He looked over at Rick. He said, Rick, I may not look good on stage tonight, but I'll look good in my casket. He wanted everybody to be straight with him before he passed away. And I saw that coming. I myself was going through a divorce at the end of Elvis's life. And he He called Angie
Joe
and I
had gone
in.
through one. I was going through one. We were all, remember? I was going through mine.
He had called Angie and I in, my wife, and tried to mend that fence. It was like he was trying to just straighten everything up.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was inevitable that the end was near. You know, Lamar, I'll never forget when I walked in the last time I saw him. I walked in his room, and he looked at me and he said, David, take care of yourself. I said, well, Elvis, listen, I'm just going to Nashville for a day. I was trying to mend the fence with Angie. I'll be back tomorrow. I'll see you tomorrow. He said, no, David, you won't ever see me again. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, the next time you see me, it'll be on a higher place and a higher plane. And I looked at him and I thought he was just being mystic, you know, because he was always saying something off the wall. But he began to weep. And he looked at me and he said, David, I love you. And he walked up to me and he put his arms around me and he hugged me so tight and held on to me so close. And it reminded me of the hug that he had given me 17 years earlier when I walked into Graceland as a confused young man, as a little boy that didn't know exactly what was going on and didn't know what a rock and roll star was. It was that same type hug as he held me close to him. And he said goodbye to me. I was at Graceland, I guess it was about 12 o'clock. And I was down in the pool room, and a girl named Amber, which was Ginger's niece, was there playing with Lisa. And she came down the steps and said, I think Elvis is sick. And I'll never forget, I came up the steps from the basement into the middle part of the house. And Lisa was standing there saying, David, Dad's sick. And I heard people, all of a sudden people started shooting up the steps. So I ran up the back steps, and others were going up the front steps, and I walked into the room, and Elvis was laying in the fetal position, I would say.
On his side.
On his side.
Was it his side?
He was on his side.
Yeah. And everybody thought it was face down. So.
And he had his face down, and we looked at him, and I thought to myself, well, Elvis just had fallen asleep.
Which he would do
or
sometimes.
Had fallen down. It wasn't uncommon to find him
right.
that way because of the way things were going towards the end. And I'll never forget, as I walked in, I had this fear. And I saw the paramedics came in, and Charlie was there, and Joe Esposito was there, and Al Strada was there. And just as we rolled him over, Vernon came in with Sandy, who he was seeing at that time. And I'll never forget, I grabbed Elvis by the shoulder, and I pulled him over, and I saw a sight that haunts me for the rest of my life. His face was blue bloated, his tongue was black and half bitten off.
That's right.
And it didn't take me 2 seconds to realize that Elvis Presley was dead. And I remember sitting there for a second, and I remember saying to myself, he's no king to me, he's no rock and roll star. All I can remember is a man who 17 years earlier picked up one confused, hurt little boy that didn't know what was going on. Lamar, I tell you, he was a human being, man. You know, because of all the things that we had seen, I knew Elvis as the human
so close
being,
to the situation,
as a person.
Yeah.
And then there was the image when I saw how people were responding. And there at the funeral, Rex Humbard and C.W. Bradley, and then Jackie Kahane did a eulogy.
Sure did. And the thing, after everybody got through talking, Jackie came back on the mic, and it was behind a curtained off part of the music room, and his body was, remember, in the living room, the casket. And it got stone quiet. And Jackie Kane said, ladies and gentlemen, Elvis has left the building. And that was a sign-off that we always used on tour to let the fans know he had left where they wouldn't have to mob anything. And it just tore us all to pieces. And we had to then, pick up that casket and carry it out to the hearse. And the casket, we were carrying the casket, and there was an enormous oak tree beside.
I remember that.
Oh, listen,
Yeah,
unbelievable.
as live as it could
yeah,
be.
I mean, in good shape, healthy tree. A limb snapped. I mean, it had to be that big around. And
Collapsed
fell.
right behind the hearse.
Yeah, collapsed
Yeah.
and slid down in between it, and I said, tell me he's not here.
Yeah.
It rattled us all that bad. And it sounded like a gunshot going off. And we got him, it rattled us, but we kept on moving, and we were all mumbling to ourselves, literally. I said, he's standing right here, just no doubt.
I think what people seem to miss out on, Lamar, is just how loving and caring Elvis really was.
Oh,
we're
he
hearing
really
all
was.
that. We hear all this negative stuff, but here's a man giving $500 million a year to charity.
That's right.
We'd come off those tours with those teddy bears. Remember, we'd
That's
go
right.
down to the St. Jude's Hospital. Elvis
We used to
give
give
those
out teddy bears, we'd go to have truckloads of
Just
them.
a caring individual.
But he was the type person that his famous statement, and you've been around 1,000 times, people sometimes would get irritated because he'd bring so many people through Graceland. And his term was, he said, if I can't share this with anybody, then it's not worth anything to me.
Right.
And he said, this is part of having it. And he said, the cars and the
right.
motorcycles and the homes and the planes, he said, that's all
Lamar,
being a star.
Very simple. He
Yeah.
never forgot where he came from.
That's right.